We made this. Welcome back, everyone, to a podcast all about the sounds of cinema and discussion about them between the notes, which is where we come in. I'm Tony Black.
And I'm Sean Wilson.
And this week, as you no doubt will have realised from our opening little segment of music that we've played, we are bringing you discussion of Tenet from Ludwig Goransson, the brand new Christopher Nolan movie. And we're going to talk a little bit about Goransson and his career and pick through some of our choices as to some of Goransson's other work that we love along the way. So, you know, we finally did it, Sean. We've both now seen Tenet at the cinema. And in our first episode back, when after our long break, when we talked about Christopher Nolan music, you know, this seemed like an eternity away. But here we are.
It's amazing that we've both got to see it and that the film is out at all, really. And as we record this, the film has only just been released in America. And it's amazing that it's got to that milestone as well. It's been a very, very long, bruising journey for Warner Brothers and Christopher Nolan, and indeed fans like us, to get to this point. Yeah, and it's this is the moment that it's all been building towards. This is the Christopher Nolan climactic moment where we both our opinions kind of coalesce now, and we talk about the score finally. So,
yeah, it's going to be really fun to do that, actually. I think it's great that it's out. It's great that it's out in the US. How well it does in the US will be very interesting to see, because obviously their cinemas are still in some places closed, and they've got more problems, I think, with the virus than we do in the UK. So how many people go and watch Tenet at the big screen will be a big open question. But yeah, I mean, I went to see it today as we record, and in the Midlands in the UK, and I enjoyed it. I had a mask on. There were about half a dozen people in the screening. It was a big super screen, and the cinema itself, the Cineworld that I went to, was completely dead. There was nobody in there. It's sort of within a shopping centre, so the shopping centre was heaving, which made me a bit nervous. But the cinema itself was very safe, very one-way system, and all that kind of thing. So. And I don't think any air conditioning was on, which was the only thing that I was a little bit worried about for a while. I was like, ooh, air conditioning, is that going to be on? Is that going to be a problem? But it seemed fine. It seemed absolutely fine. So on the basis of that, I don't know if it's the same for lots of people listening, either in the UK or other countries, but on the basis of that, I think by and large, we might be all right going back now. I think, as long as we're careful. Yeah,
I went to see the film Tenet, that is, for the second time the other week at my local cinema. It was a showcase cinema, and yeah, like you, it was very, very quiet, very coherent, arrows on the floor directing people around. The idea that your tickets are scanned, there's no physical transfer of tickets, that you have an allocated seat, not near anybody else. Yeah, I was impressed with that, and I've been impressed with the other two cinema trips that I've made over the last few months. So I think it's been taken seriously, clearly, and I felt safe as well.
That's really good. That's great. So hopefully we'll both be able to get back and see some movies that are going to be coming up. But we're going to talk about Tenet, but because we're big teases, we're going to make you wait a little bit. We're going to start by talking a little bit about some of our other favourite Ludwig Göransson tracks, and a little bit about the guy himself, because obviously he scored Tenet when Hans Zimmer went off to score Dune, and really probably No Time to Die, the Bond film he was working on, I'd guess, around the same time as well, because he stepped into that. So he was busy doing two films I saw trailed, actually, before Tenet today. I saw the new trailer for No Time to Die, which is kick-ass, that trailer. It's amazing. And I saw the trailer for Dune.
Nice. I didn't get to see that, so I'm really jealous. I've not seen anything of it yet, so I cannot wait for that.
Oh, even the trailer for the trailer, Sean, gave me goosebumps. So God knows, because that's my favourite book ever, and I can't wait to see it. It just looks so good. So we're gonna talk about Ludwig Göransson, who stepped in to score Tenet, and a little, because he's done plenty of other things. So we're gonna do three, then we'll talk about Tenet, then we'll do another three. So sure, let's start with one of yours then that you've gone for. You picked This Is America by Childish Gambino, which was co-written and co-produced by Ludwig Göransson. Now, Childish Gambino is Donald Glover, isn't it, from Community and other things like Star Wars, Solo, and various other things like that. I think I've heard this, but I'm really unfamiliar with it. But is this is this in step with what Goransson does, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, it is. Well, the association between Goransson and Childish Gambino goes back to 2010 when they were working on Community together, and they've really established a very long-standing collaboration based on principles of R&B, hip hop, funk, soul. And this was the song and the accompanying video directed by Hiro Murai that absolutely took 2018 by storm. Absolutely phenomenally successful, was streamed millions and millions of times, and it had that incredibly provocative video that is based, it juxtaposes balletic dancing with scenes of racial unrest and violence and murder. Very, very stunning video, and obviously Donald Glover, Childish Gambino is in the foreground, but I just think it cements that genre-defining approach that Goransson and Gambino have done, which is it traverses different genres. At some points, it's got the sort of not mean bass line that owes sort of more to R&B and to funk. Then it goes over to a bit of gospel. Then it starts to become angrier and more industrial again, and it's really great. I mean, have you seen the video for it?
Oh god, I think so once, but I have to admit I'm really not up on Childish Gambino and this stuff, so I wouldn't like to say I know it really well, to be honest.
I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, he's so Goransson's worked on sort of albums like they've released 3 albums: Camp, Because of the Internet, and Awaken My Love. And it's really in the background of This Is America, there are contributions from various rappers, including like Young Thug and Savage and Offset. It debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard's Hot 100. Apparently, the 31st song to do so in the chart's history. Won 4 Grammys. It was a real success, and it really exemplified and continues to exemplify the conversation about racial segregation and racial oppression in America. But it does it in a way that is, as with pretty much all of their collaborations, very listenable. And that's the irony of the song. The song is incredibly catchy and almost in a peculiar kind of way euphoric, and yet you watch it in contrast with the video and you're meant to be pinballing between the tone of the music and also what you're seeing in the visuals, which is very horrifying and very violent, and yet that said, there is real understandable anger within the lyrics as well. It's really tremendous, and I think the experimental side of Goransson, as heard in his film scores that we'll talk about, certainly comes out of his work with Gambino, which, as I've said, traverses genres and styles. So I think this is a good jumping off point, really.
It's interesting as well that he sort of, because obviously he started to some degree with television, didn't he? You know, Community was a big hit, and he scored at that, and he would have got to do. And I did a Community watch not long ago, actually, and he would have got to do some fun things in that, even though it's a sitcom. That it was a very broad, adventurous show that would explore lots and riff on lots of different cinematic styles and things like that. So he got to explore a little bit with that. But he also scored Fruitvale Station back in 2013, which was Ryan Coogler's film with Michael B. Jordan, and obviously that they would go on and collaborate with Black Panther again. So, you know, he seems to have this one foot in the world of, you know, R&B and rap and this kind of quite, you know, black influence sort of music, and that he's then explored through other films. So it's interesting how, you know, he started doing that with Donald Glover, Childish Gambino, and it's, you know, it feels like it's infused a lot of his more, you know, quote unquote conventional, you know, orchestral kind of cinematic scores as well.
Yeah, definitely. There is. I think Goransson has developed a very signature house style, and I think any artist that does that is worth commending. And I should say about Ryan Coogler, Goransson and Coogler went to the University of Southern California together, which is how he ended up scoring Fruitvale Station, which had this kind of ambient, sort of eerie score, which is entirely appropriate for the material with that film. It's about the real life shooting of Oscar Grant. It's a very powerful film. But yeah, I think it's it's interesting. I mean, we've talked before about how certain film composers come out of a rock and pop background or R&B background, rap background, whatever, and you think of somebody like, for example, Danny Elfman, who came out of Oingo Boingo and went into symphonic film scoring, not really having any idea what he was doing, and within a few years that partnership with Tim Burton was cemented as one of the best in the world. So it's I think it's fascinating also looking at Goransson's collaborations with Coogler and also Childish Gambino as well. These are very, very rock solid partnerships that, you know, the musical tastes evolve and mutate and change around and take different forms. So yeah, it's a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think for my one, I'm going to pick is probably the film where I first actually became aware of his name, strangely enough, which was Creed. So I've gone for You're a Creed, which is the sort of climactic piece from Creed, and which obviously is the revamp, I guess, new era version of the Rocky franchise, with again Michael B. Jordan as Adonis Creed, the son of Apollo Creed, who obviously was killed in Rocky 2, Rocky 3, start of Rocky 3. Got my Rockies there wrong, Sean.
wrong Rockies.
Wrong Rockies. Because it's Clubber Lang who kills Apollo
That's right.
Creed, I think, isn't it? At the start.
Oh no, it's not. It's is it Ivan Drago, isn't it? It's Ivan Drago who in Rocky 4. It's Rocky 4, and see, even I'm getting my Rockies mixed up now. See, this is like it's such a scramble that nostalgia just gets in the way, doesn't it? But yeah. So
I should have known that though, because the whole point of Creed 2 is that Ivan Drago
comes back. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's bad that I got that
it's
wrong.
All right, we'll forgive you that one. So I do it all the time.
But yeah, at the start of Rocky 4, obviously he dies, so that the whole film is about his son years and years later, you know, inheriting his father's legacy with the help of Rocky Balboa, you know, good old
Adrian.
I can't do a
you
good
can't
solo.
not do that, can you?
Well, we got to do Adrian. And to be fair, take the piss we might, but Stallone's great in that film. He's really, really good as Rocky. In you know, his best performance on Rocky for years. But the way that I was really impressed by the score for Creed. I mean, it's a great film anyway, but I was really impressed by the score because I feel like he really got back to Bill Conti's very memorable Rocky themes and brewed them up into this whole, you know, new concoction. And You're a Creed was really, I found it to be really rousing. And I remember thinking, who is this guy? Who's this Ludwig Goransson guy? Because he's great. Like, I really like what he's done with this. It felt almost a little bit like a throwback piece in a way. So, and I just thought it was a great score in general. I think it honoured the Rocky franchise really well.
I'll tell you what, having listened to this score again on its own terms for this podcast, I think this might be my favourite Goransson score, actually, because what I love about it was that he develops this brand new fanfare for Michael B. Jordan's character, Adonis. And what that does stylistically, that's very, very similar to what Bill Conti did with Rocky. Because the thing is with Rocky, that Rocky always had that very, very firm orchestral melodic basis with the "You're Gonna Fly Now" theme by Bill Conti. That is the Rocky theme. I mean, I know a lot of people would say it's Eye of the Tiger. I would disagree. I'd say Eye of the Tiger is a song that happens to be written for one of the films. But the Rocky backbone is that Bill Conti theme, and you can't have a Rocky film without that. Although I think Rocky 4 went without, because that was scored by Vince DiCola, wasn't it? I don't think that used the Rocky theme.
There's no Rocky theme. Wow, no way.
I don't think there is. It's a very, very different score. I mean, it's quintessentially 80s. It's very, very synth heavy. It's very different from the rest of the Rocky scores, but principally that is the theme that needs to be honoured and replicated by Goransson, and I think he does it brilliantly. And I think the way that his new fanfare builds across the course of the Creed score and then finally merges with the Conti theme at the end is just gets you punching the air every time. You know, as Donnie is punching his rival in the face, you're punching the air on the screen going, yeah, come on, go on, win this. And I think it's a fabulous score. I think it earns that emotional impact at the end. It's quite a restrained score. You get that brassy fanfare, but you only get a few bars of it here and there. It builds up very, very carefully to that climax, and then, as with all film scores, if you earn that emotion at the end, it's all the more powerful. And there's also elements of like trap hip hop and R&B, which again goes back to the Childish Gambino connection. There's a lot of experimental touches in the score as well, which speak of, Donnie's background and of the streets of like urbanity and the streets of Philadelphia. And I think it's a terrific score, actually, and I think the film is great as well. It complements the film really well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about the sequel as well? Because he comes back and scores Creed 2. And I think that I don't know if I loved that score quite as much. And equally, I enjoyed the film. I didn't love the film either. It's quite as much as the first Creed. But I don't know. I think it continues he continues a lot of the ideas in that, really. But I still think that Creed, I can see why you think it's his best, because it really felt quite special. That it really blew me away at the time. It really stood out. I don't know if the second one quite has that same impact, really.
Yeah, I think the problem with Creed 2, both the film and the score, is the element of surprise is gone, like you alluded to there. I think when the first Creed movie came out, both it and the accompanying score were like, wow, that's a lot better than anyone expected it to be. Because the cynical belief was that, it's just another Rocky cash cow, cash-in movie. It's not going to be very good, but it cemented Ryan Coogler as a fabulous director, and it's like, wow, and the music had a lot of integrity to it as well. I think Creed 2 does have integrity, it just doesn't have that surprise, and I also think it falls into the trap of just recycling nostalgia for the sake of it, which I think that's something that the first Creed navigated around very well. The first Creed had just enough echoes of the past, but it didn't rely on them as props. It just alluded to those things, and it was like, how have the ghosts of the past echoed the people in the present? How have things echoed down through the generations? I think Creed 2 kind of goes all in on that to its detriment by bringing Ivan Drago, Dolph Lundgren back and things like that. And I think the score has got its moments, but I think it does feel like kind of a rehash of the Creed score. There is one track that I really do like, which is just Drago, which has got this lovely like Slavic choir to mirror Ivan Drago's like sort of granite-like physique, but
I will break you.
Oh, if he dies, he dies.
If he dies, he dies.
Yo, Adrian!
Creed 2, yeah, it's decent, but not quite on the level of Creed. But yeah, Goransson's score for Creed is brilliant. But before we talk about Tenet, anyway, we'll get one more in from you. Now, we've both touched on this film, and I think it's impossible not to, really. So we might I'll talk about it a little bit later. But you went for a couple from Black Panther, one of which being A King's Sunset, which I think is towards the end of that score. This obviously is the most famous Goransson score to date. This is the one he won the Oscar for. This is the Marvel, one of the apex of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Tinged with sadness now after the death of Chadwick Boseman recently, who played T'Challa, obviously. But that's going to make this film retrospectively all the more powerful, I think. But the score is magnificent. I think I don't know if we did a top 10 of the 2010s as a decade. I don't think we've done that. We ought to do that at some point, I think. I know we did the best of 2010, but we should do the decade. And I think Black Panther would be up there. I think it'd be in my top 5 of the entire decade, really. I think it's a masterpiece.
It is a tremendous score, and I think it came at a point where the Marvel Cinematic Universe was just about starting to wrestle some continuity into its soundtracks, because the MCU has not been famous for that, with this revolving door of composers, some coming in, some coming out, themes not being carried across, and there was always this accusation that the Marvel Cinematic Universe scores were bland, which I never believed. There were always some very, very fine scores in the MCU, but I mean, even within that, I thought the score for Black Panther was very good, because it emboldens the movie, and it grafts more meaning onto the movie, which is what any great film score should do for blockbusters or otherwise. It is its own language, both literally with the choir and also figuratively in an emotional sense. I mean, I think I did interview Ludwig Goransson about this, and he was brilliant to talk to. I mean, he basically talked about the the score was very, very difficult to do. He travelled around Senegal, I believe it was, and he actively researched the musical traditions of Senegal in order to make the score sound more authentic. And he said there was a very, very difficult thing about blending the sort of non-melodic, dysrhythmic sort of percussion patterns of Senegal with the more traditional needs of the Western symphonic orchestra that you would expect here in a superhero score. And I thought he brought those two wildly disparate styles together brilliantly. It's amazing when you hear the score, and when you hear it in the context of the film, it flows very, very well between those two different styles. It honours the heroism of T'Challa, Chadwick Boseman, and yet it also throws out these very, very very innovative touches. I mean, you've got the vocals of Baba Mal, who is a very, very highly regarded Senegalese vocalist, and that it's his voice that you hear during the King's Sunset sequence. And I mean, one can almost imagine Chadwick Boseman actually himself passing on to the sound of that voice, because it's Baba Mal's voice is gorgeous. But you've also got the use of the heartbeat like drums. That there's the drum pattern, which I think Goransson told me that it spells out through the notes. It spells out T'Challa, so that there's like a little rhythmic drumming pattern repeated all the way through it, which is just another beautifully innovative little touch. Maybe the sort of that's the kind of involved nuance that was maybe lacking in some of the other Marvel Cinematic Universe scores, which kind of did the broad strokes thing. But this actually gets down, and it actually thinks very, very creatively about how to use certain instruments and harmonies and melodies to communicate something that you're not seeing. And also the trap hip hop theme for Killmonger, which has got this lovely sort of tribal, it's got this warfare going on between this like trap hip hop and this tribal background, which of course suits his character brilliantly because he is of two worlds, and now he's come back to Wakanda to claim his birthright. It's a superb score. I think I'm really so glad it got the Oscar. It was the first superhero score to ever get an Oscar, which is amazing, really. When you think about
I mean, much as this is brilliant, I mean, it shouldn't have that crown, should it? Really, not when you've got things like John Williams' Superman out there, and you know, even Danny Elfman's Batman, you know, and all the loads of these amazing. Yeah. It shouldn't be the first, but it's great. It's great that he got it. Definitely, it is, and it's a real testament to how much that film struck a chord. You know, I think, and on all levels, really. And I think you're right. I think it sort of amps up what was. I mean, there are. I think we've talked about it before, maybe in one of the previous iterations of this podcast. Although we might have covered it on the Avengers Endgame episode we did. But you know, there have been some great Marvel scores from the MCU. There really have. But I think this one does punch up a little bit. It does do things that a lot of the others haven't done. So I think it's the score. If Creed is a brilliant piece that sort of makes people aware of Goransson, this is the score that I think boosted him up into the top tier, really, you know, as a sort of new incoming top tier composer. Yeah,
I think you can hear within this score as well the fact that he is drawing on his experience working with black musicians like Childish Gambino. You can hear that the authenticity comes through. Because clearly Black Panther was an incredibly important piece of work. You know, as when he was first conceived by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, he was the first ever African superhero, and then, you know, several decades later, the film has got the responsibility of putting that on the big screen and doing it properly. There was a lot of social responsibility on it, and I think the film carried that, brilliantly directed by Brian Coogler, like magisterially acted by Chadwick Boseman and the rest of the cast. And I think the music supports that as well. The music feels very authentic. All that research that Goransson put into it, you can hear it. It pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really does. It's fantastic. And we'll come back to this because I've got one other track from that I want to talk about later. But yeah, look, let's get stuck into Tenet. And before we do, because we've been lucky enough to have been sent the music, let's play a little bit more of Ludwig Goransson's score for Tenet to give people a little bit of a mood scene setter before we talk about the score. So here we go. So, okay, right then. Now, in a previous episode, I think in the last episode actually, you talked about your first impressions of Tenet, but you'd seen the film, I hadn't. Now we both have. Now we've both also listened to this score independently of the movie. So, I mean, the question is what... I mean, you mentioned what you thought of the film, but you've seen it again, haven't you? So what do you generally think of the movie, first off, on a second viewing?
I think it's a better movie on second viewing. It's nowhere near Christopher Nolan's best. It's a mid-tier Christopher Nolan movie. There is still a real problem with the horrendous sound mixing, which makes the incredibly complicated dialogue frankly incomprehensible. But the second time that I watched it, I had an advantage in as much as I could anticipate the broad story beats before they happened. So I'd already acclimatised to the bludgeoning frenetic rhythm of the movie the first time I'd watched it. That allowed me to then anticipate what was going to happen, but also concentrate a bit more on the interconnecting bits that relied on the dialogue. A lot of it still went over my head because of that sound mixing, but I think it's a better film on second viewing because I think the humanity and the philosophical undercurrents come out more. And I suppose we should say now, right, the film has been out for a while in the UK and Ireland. I'm assuming we're going to discuss this with spoilers, right? I'm assuming we're going to...
I think it'll make it easier to talk about the score if we do. So let's preface that with a just beware spoilers, guys, because we will. Yeah.
So I think what I like about the film more on second viewing is the audacity of the narrative construction. The idea that basically what you've got is a movie that works forward in one direction and then basically retraces its steps back to the start of the narrative and then springboards back beyond the chronological start of the narrative to another sequence that otherwise is only relayed anecdotally through dialogue, which is the scene with Elizabeth Debicki and Kenneth Branagh when you realise that her character Kat was blackmailed by her evil arms dealer husband Sator, and he cemented his hold over her. And the humanity of that resonated more the second time around. The fact that when John David Washington's character at the halfway point of the movie inverts time to move her back through time so he can save her from the inverted bullet that she's been shot with, but she also seizes on that to basically make amends for that hideous moment where her husband cemented his control over her. And in the process of doing that, she also saves the world as well. But it's like no one will ever know that happened. The ripple effects will continue from the past in inverted commas through to the future inverted commas. But the idea of these like unseen heroes like sort of operating in the background, I thought was actually quite poignant and more resonant for me on second view. But now I really want to know what you think of it in totality, having seen it for the first time.
This may take you by surprise, but I genuinely think this is his best movie since The Dark Knight.
Blimey.
Yeah. Now I say
stunned silence.
Everyone will probably be listening to that. Go what?
Don't click off, people. Don't turn it off.
Hang in there because I'm going to explain why. But I'm doing this in the middle of writing my review because once I get out of the cinema, usually if it's a film I like, I'm immediately scribbling down what I want to write. So I'm sort of still constructing my written review as I'm writing this. So this will help actually. But I think most people know by now who listen to this that The Dark Knight Rises is my favourite Christopher Nolan film. But I've long admitted it's probably not his best. So, that's still my favourite, it'll always be my favourite. I think Dunkirk is one of his best, and I would refer anyone to listen to the Motion Pictures episode that Carl Sweeney and I did recently on Insomnia and Christopher Nolan, because we go over what we think our top 10 is up to Tenet. So, basically, what this means is that Tenet's now going to be my number 3 out of 11. I thought it was brilliant, I really did, and I went in with, the real sort of balanced... I had not read any reviews, but I'd seen the headlines and I'd seen the ratings. I'd seen people like Peter Bradshaw give it 5 stars. I'd seen people elsewhere in The Guardian giving it 2, and things like that. So I knew it was like with any Christopher Nolan film, it's going to polarise. I firmly expected it to be sort of in the middle. And I don't think it's a masterpiece, don't get me wrong, but I do think it's better than some people have given it credit for, because I think what it does, ultimately, is it very cleverly sort of epitomises exactly what Christopher Nolan does. This film is the most Christopher Nolan film ever, and the reason is because I think he's kind of aware And this is the first film, I think, that really glances to the audience and nudges us and says, here you go. I just did Dunkirk, which was a bit different. It was shorter. There was no protagonist. Right, here we go. I'm going to give you what you want now. And he does it by actually being cheeky enough to call John David Washington's character the protagonist. And even throughout the film, he's talking about how he is the protagonist. I'm the protagonist. I'm the lead of this movie. I'm the hero who's going to save the world. But I think, if anything proves Christopher Nolan probably will never do a Bond film, or if he does, it would be very different. It's this. Because I don't think Christopher Nolan believes in the idea of the one man saving the world. I think this film proves that. You just said it very well about Elizabeth Debicki at the end. I think the whole idea, he inverts the idea of a protagonist, which is, quite telling given the whole mind-bending physics of it. I think that what he does, the palindrome of a story that he basically does, the way it bends in on itself, and it gets to a point and then it turns around and goes back the other way, I think it's brilliant. And I think there are lots of things in this. I agree about the sound mixing. I think at times, yes, the dialogue was a bit difficult to hear. I was making sure I was sort of craning a little bit in my seat to get some of it, and there was a bit of muffling and things. That's true, and like I think you said in the last episode, he chooses to set sort of key conversations on a moving catamaran and all that. And you think, what's the point of that? I laughed, I chuckled when I saw that because I thought of you.
And then it's like Kenneth Branagh's going, "Why don't you turn the catamaran around to the right?" It's like, what's that? Speak up a bit.
He's very monotone Russian all the way through. So I get that.
Who is this American who sleep with my wife? I'm turning into Borat.
He isn't far off though, and he is a little bit more than a little bit 90s Bond villain. I think Kenneth Branagh in this, but I don't mind that. It has a lot of the constructions of quite typically a Bond movie, actually, in many ways, or that kind of spy movie. But it just has, I think, I just love the audacity of it. I love the epic nature of the fact he has this mind-bending physics idea, which is a load of bunkum, but it probably has some conceptual reality, the reversed entropy kind of thing. But I don't think anyone could have pulled this off like he does. And there were points where I genuinely was like, oh, you clever bastard. Like, I think that whole sequence, pretty much after... the turning point of the story, in the base where you have the two Kenneth Branaghs and the two John. That point, I was like, oh, this is great, because then once it starts to curve in on itself, it flips everything around, and you really start then to see the whole point of the inversion and how it works and the cleverness of it. And I was really, really impressed, and I think it's probably because it's really in my wheelhouse of the kind of cinema that I love. And, people might call me a bit of an apologist for Nolan, probably. But I genuinely think this is one of his best films. And I think this will divide, but I think it will get a real appreciation, a real critical appreciation. And I suspect that actually, as people, started loving Inception, and then over the years, I've gone a little bit more lukewarm on some of that now. Certainly the first half of that film. I think the second half is fantastic, but the first half, I think, has its issues. I think Tenet will go the other way. In terms of inversion.
Ironically,
yeah, I do. I think people are going to start off going, oh, I don't know about that, it's a bit mad. And then I think as they think about it, and as it goes, they watch it again, repeat, I think they'll really see it. I think it'll click, and I think people will start nudging this up their lists. So I'm gonna go there right now and say this is one of his best films. I'm putting it out there, Sean. So hill I might have to die on, but I thought it was great. I suppose the key question for this podcast is the score great? What are we? You're obviously less enamoured of the film, even though I know you clearly you enjoyed it. But like, what do you think about the score? Do you think the score hits those heights, or do you think it's in the middle, or what do you think of it in terms of Goransson's general scoreography?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first things first, listening to it, I could hear overtones of many past Goransson scores. This is what I was talking about, when the fact that he's got a very, very distinctive artistic voice. There is something about the way that he mixes an orchestra with these samples and these strange sound effects. I mean, having listened to the Venom score again, Venom was a terrible film, but the score, I think, is actually very interesting on its own terms.
We'll talk about Venom in a bit. Cause
yeah,
I don't want to talk about the film.
Yeah. I think the irony of the irony of Tenet is that it's an incredibly loud movie, and yet even within that loudness, and bearing in mind the first time I saw it in IMAX, you know, the sound couldn't have been better rectified, the picture couldn't have been better, and yet even within that sound design, there were nuances in the music that I didn't pick up on until I listened to it on its own terms. It's just been released now by WaterTower Music. And I was listening to it on its own terms thinking, blimey, you know, this is a really interesting score when taken away from the rest of the sound mixture, when separated from the muffled dialogue and the pyrotechnics and the gunfire and the Russian accent. It's really I think it's actually a really impressive score. I've been very, very divided on the music that's been written for Christopher Nolan's movies. I think that what Hans Zimmer did for the Dark Knight trilogy was by and large dull, with some interesting highlights, but certainly the highlights were not consistent enough to make those scores as good as they should have been. I really like what he did for Interstellar, because I think that was a rare instance of Nolan allowing a more melodically inclined score and also encouraging Zimmer to hit on a particular instrumental choice, the organ, which gave the movie a residual character. It suggested things beyond the frame. It wasn't just noisy, although it was noisy in the film, but it was noisy while with a storytelling purpose to it, which is always a problem I've had with music in Nolan's films. And indeed, there have been a lot of accusations towards Nolan and Goransson that the music just makes the movie louder. I mean, it does make the movie louder, and I think the general mixing of the sound is a problem. Take the score on its own terms, and I actually think it's very impressive. It is unmistakably a Goransson score. I think that what I like about it is that, unlike a lot of the previous scores for Nolan, there is a healthy mixture of an organic orchestra in it that is sitting side by side with samples and electronics, and I think the overlapping mixture of that plays to Goransson's strengths. The idea that he has crisscrossed organic and synthetic all the way throughout his career, even going back through his production career, which is more extensive than his film career. I mean, his production career is extraordinary, not just with Childish Gambino, and I think he is well positioned to write a score for a film like this, in which the central conceit is that the flow of entropy, the flow of time, you know, can be altered and warped, and the ostensibly normal fabric of reality isn't necessarily what you think it is, and therefore that feeds into the weird discombobulating air of the score, which has got the instruments being played backwards, and it's got these really creepy breathing effects, which are very chilling, and that plays into obviously the motif of the oxygen masks. But I think the other reason why I like it is because there are themes in it, and this is again something that I've struggled with in the scores for Nolan. I never liked the idea that Hans Zimmer did that Nolan then agreed on, which is that Batman needs to be conveyed by two notes. I thought that was just simplistic in the extreme. I think Batman is too complicated a character to be conveyed through that, hence why I will always favour the likes of Danny Elfman and Elliot Goldenthal on that basis. But there is at least one main theme in this for the protagonist, John David Washington's character, which gets airtime all the way through the score. It's really intelligently built up. There's a track called Windmills early on, in which it's got this pensive air of anticipation. That's right at the very beginning of the film, just after he's been told about the Tenet operation that it turns out he set himself up for in the future. That's what we find out at the end of the movie. There is this pensive air of anticipation before he goes to meet Clemence Posey's character, and she shows him the inverted bullet technique. And then that theme comes to the forefront in a tremendous track such as Foils, which has got this really thrumming, like Vangelis style undercurrent to it. That's the catamaran sequence, which is really well scored. But that theme is then there's that climactic track, Posterity, which is 12 minutes long. And as soon as I saw that was 12 minutes, I was like, oh blimey, here we go, we're going to get the big bludgeoning sequence. That was actually more musically creative than I thought it was going to be. It wasn't just the usual Hans Zimmer style barrage of noise. I think that the use of the organic and the synthetic, the sampled and the orchestra comes together very well. And again, that theme is in there guiding you through it. Yeah, I think it's an impressive score, actually. I like it a lot.
Yeah, same, definitely. And it's funny, when I I listened to it because originally we were going to record this, and I wasn't before I would have seen Tenet. And then we thought, well, actually, let's wait, because I was going to go and see it. And I'd listened to the score, and I thought it was interesting, but it didn't quite connect with me fully. And I think listening to it after seeing the film, I was driving back home from the cinema, and I had it on in the car. And I thought it really clicked. And while watching the film, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it worked incredibly well with the movie and fitted. And then on a listen beyond, it's not necessarily a melodious kind of thing you can just throw on, but at the same time, I think it does work individually. I think it does have, you've described it really well there, but I think it does have some of these tracks that do have a certain theme, a certain melody running through it. I really got from this that sort of almost sort of flitting sense of juxtaposition of time. I got a lot of it feels like he's trying to convey the jagged nature of the the inversion and the story playing in all these different frames and that kind of thing, all these different inversions of time. There's a certain way he approaches it. It's not just bombast, it's not just a thunderous soundscape. There is some nuance, there is some cleverness in there. There's elements of piano in there as well to underscore things. I think it's really good, and I think it's definitely a Nolan-ish kind of score, isn't it? Along the lines of, it's the sort of thing you could imagine Hans Zimmer doing along similar-ish lines, but I still think it wouldn't have had the sort of dexterity that Goransson's does here. I think his score would have been a lot more, thunderous in some senses. And in fact, it will be interesting to see what Zimmer does with No Time to Die in a few months, because obviously that won't be exactly the same as Tenet, but obviously that's a big, huge spy thriller. So a lot of people are very curious as to what he's going to do with Bond, which is traditionally a very sort of melodic, action-based score. I think Goransson would do a great Bond score actually, particularly after this. I thought it was really clever. I thought it was really constructed of some fascinating ideas, both some softer tracks and then some which really sort of, in that classic Nolan style, ramp things up, take you from a point of anticipation and builds up to a throbbing, exciting crescendo. So yeah, I dig it. I really do. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, I think the part of the problem that I have with several of Hans Zimmer's scores for Christopher Nolan, obviously Christopher Nolan has worked with other composers as well. He's obviously worked with David Julian early on. Part of the problem that I have with Hans Zimmer's scores is that I think that the house style, the action house style that was probably first came into view with the likes of Crimson Tide in 1995, the idea of that you can't tell where the divide between the orchestra and the sort of digital sound manipulation comes in. And in the likes of Crimson Tide, it worked very, very well. But it's almost like when you got to the Christopher Nolan movie, it's like, right, let's have that, but just more. Let's just have it, but just bigger, louder. But bigger and louder doesn't equate to more narratively interesting. A film score always has to tell you what you're not seeing. And I think that a lot of Hans Zimmer scores for Nolan haven't done that. Primarily the Batman scores. I think Interstellar is fabulous. I think Dunkirk does a very good job in a very uncomfortable way of this groaning, grinding like mass of noise, which is very appropriate. But I think Goransson is better at this kind of, it's sort of electronically manipulated action score than Zimmer is. I mean, I have liked some of Zimmer's action music before. I love Backdraft and things, but crucially, I like Backdraft because it's very orchestral. Large orchestra, there are electronics in it, but I think I've always preferred Zimmer when he's not doing that kind of stuff, when he's more reflective, mournful. You think of things like the Thin Red Line or Beyond Rangoon or Rain Man, and I think that Goransson is well positioned, given his extensive background working with rap and R&B and soul and Childish Gambino, to both adhere to that Christopher Nolan sound, because you're right, there is a Christopher Nolan sound and he is operating within those parameters, and yet he is also working within those parameters to not just create a barraging wall of noise, but he's suggesting a narrative within it, which is a problem that I've had with a lot of past Christopher Nolan scores. So, yeah, I think it's very impressive. I think it's a shame that the Foils track, which I think is the best track on the album, it's a shame that approach wasn't applied to all of the action sequences. There is often, particularly in the car chase sequence, there is that sense of bludgeoning, Horn of Doom, let's try and just crank the volume, it's like, I mean, not only that, but in the 747 scene, when obviously there's that famous sequence where Nolan crashed a plane for real into the hangar, you get multiple wham wham wham. Yeah. It's like, oh god, it's as if one wasn't enough, and that is the kind of Hans Zimmer effect, and that is that's what I don't like Nolan indulging Hans Zimmer on. That it's kind of, it is a problem. But I think for the most part, I would have liked to have heard the style of that foils track with that almost kind of pulsating, like almost like, I don't know how to describe it, like dance-like rhythm in a way, like that pulsating, throbbing rhythm being applied to the car chase sequence or to the climactic temporal pincer movement, because I think that hearing that over the context of an action sequence would have made it dynamically more interesting. But I know it's always dangerous to review the film that you want to see or hear versus the one that you actually get. We're here to assess what we're presented with, and I think on the whole, I'm very, very impressed with the score. It cements Goransson as a very distinctive talent.
You're talking about the temporal pincer movement, though. Was it just me who every time Aaron Taylor-Johnson said temporal, I was like, what? Like,
yes,
temporal. Why are you saying
but
temporal?
Also,
he wasn't even American. He wasn't even American. He was British. He was going temporal pincer. Like, we are about temporal, Aaron. Come on.
I think it was the big hipster beard that he had, which was just muffling some of the dialogue. But also, I mean, there are a few. I mean, the title of the movie itself is being repeatedly mispronounced by people. Tenet. Even within the movie. Even within the movie, people were saying Tenet, and I was like, "It's Tenet."
Were they?
It's not. I swear. When John David, when the protagonist is on the boat at the beginning, and he's first told about the Tenet operation, the guy that's briefing him says Tenet. Tell me he doesn't say Tenet. I mean, again, it might be the atrocious sound mixing that makes it sound like that, but I swear he's saying Tenet.
Well, I will watch this again. I don't know if I'll go back to the cinema, but I will absolutely watch this when I'll get it on Blu-ray, so I will look out, when when it comes out on there on a small screen. I'll look out for tenants. So yeah, somebody's got to do a count. How many times does a character say tenant in the film? And we need to get a tenant count. Do you reckon a lot of them just, when Nolan said cut, they were like, "Oh, Chris, why couldn't you just call the film Entropy? It's easy to say." Tenet doesn't even mean a lot in the end to the film, really. So why call it that?
Could you not just call it forwards backwards, Chris? Just do it as that. But that would be a spoiler, wouldn't it? So,
true.
Yeah.
Inversion. He could have just called it
inversion.
Inversion.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He literally had 2 or 3 very good, mysterious titles, and he went for the most difficult one to pronounce. So, classic Nolan.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. We'll play another little segment from Tenet, whatever it's called, before we talk a little bit more about Goransson. So let's play, some more of this really good score. Okay, let's do a few more Goransson pieces before we leave. Then, so we'll do another one of mine. I'd like to just mention the Mandalorian, actually, and this is him. This is Goransson going back to television, and he did Spotify has entire episode, almost 50-minute or whatever scores for every episode of The Mandalorian, which is the big Star Wars spin-off series on Disney Plus, starring Pedro Pascal as The Mandalorian. And in each one, there is the title track, The Mandalorian, which is my favourite on there because it actually has the main theme running through it. And I think he's done great work for this. And the second season, actually, is coming out at the end of October. So it'll be great to see what else he's done for that. But I don't know if you've watched The Mandalorian yet, Sean. I mean, it's a really good show. And I think he's done some terrific work doing a lot of riffing on essentially the spaghetti western genre, because that is basically what this is. It is Star Wars spaghetti western in many ways. You know, that kind of style.
Yeah, well, I've only watched the first episode of it, so to just correct me on this if I'm wrong. So it takes place between the events of Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. That's right, isn't it?
I believe so.
That's the chronology of it. So, yeah, and based on the episode I saw, I was really impressed with it. I thought the idea of Pedro Pascal as the helmeted Mandalorian, the bounty hunter, who is navigating that palpably tactile, windswept, gritty sort of underbelly of the Star Wars universe. Not unlike Rogue One, actually. A lot of the characters from Rogue One, that those guys at ground level who ultimately set in motion the entire timeline of the first Star Wars trilogy, and therefore what comes after it as well. So I was really impressed with it, and I think that having listened to several of the episode scores on Spotify, so I've only watched one episode, but I've listened to several of the scores. So I appreciate that. That will distort my view of things a bit. But anyone who can come up with a Star Wars score that doesn't simply sound like it's aping John Williams has achieved something there. Whether it's something that you particularly like is another matter entirely. There was an interview that I read with Goransson with IO9 Gizmodo about the construction of the score for The Mandalorian. And it's interesting that apparently he was pushing for a more traditional John Williams style score, and then Jon Favreau, the showrunner, said, "Oh no, we've got time to make this really experimental and really quite weird." So it was Jon Favreau apparently who pushed for the resulting score that we now hear. I mean, there are themes in it, and I think that the theme, the Mandalorian theme that occurs at the end of each episode, as heard on the album, is really terrific, and that really does get the swashbuckling sense of John Williams really well. But those moments only come through, and obviously you've heard them, they only come through in fits and starts, don't they? They're very kind of spotty. But the also in that interview, they also talked about the use of the bass recorder. They were Goransson was playing around with he's a multi-instrumentalist. He was playing around with lots of different instruments. He then hit on the bass recorder that he'd never played before. Favreau then went, "No, that's it. That's the sound of the Mandalorian. That's his instrument." But it's also, the amount of electronic and sampled manipulation, and even I was surprised, because I thought going into the scores, I thought, well, there's going to be a fair amount of experimentation because it is a Goransson score. But even I was surprised by how much sort of weird sounds there were in it, and I was surprised by how sparing the traditional sound was. And clearly there's also the Baby Yoda theme as well, which again in that same interview, it's a really good interview, it's worth checking out. There was a desire to write the Baby Yoda theme as seen from the point of view of the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian doesn't know what it is, and therefore the theme has got this not entirely harmonious, slightly quirky, slightly weird feel to it. It's not just a sort of cute, maudlin, mawkish theme. It's odder than that. And so I think dramatically it's very well considered. I mean, by this stage now, the Star Wars franchise is so old. Do we really want to hear yet another John Williams pastiche? I'm quite up for the idea of a score, a Star Wars score that sounds like this. It's not always harmonically pleasing or particularly easy to listen to, but I do think it's dramatically interesting.
Yeah, I agree actually. Yeah, I think it's trying to do something a bit different, and I think I think with, you mentioned Rogue One, it does feel along similar lines, really. And in terms of, the show anyway, in terms of what it's trying to do. And that score by Giacchino sort of tried to skirt both sides of it. I think, trying to appeal to the Williams side of Star Wars, but then trying to do other things. And I think this show will go more down that road, along as it goes. So even though some aspects of it might be a bit more, technical in terms of getting us from A to B in terms of the story and, things like that, I think that the actual Mandalorian melody is great, and it really does. I remember watching the episodes, and at the end, that the credits are lovely in that show because they do like a montage of artwork from the episode and things like that, and they always put this score on the end, and I'm sitting there going da 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 every single episode. It's really good. It's really hummable. It's really good to sort of hum along to, and it's a lot of fun in that sense. So yeah, I really like it, and I'm looking forward to the second season of the show as well, because I'd say to anyone, it is pretty damn good actually. It's one of the better things to come out of the Star Wars universe, probably since The Last Jedi. So, yeah, check it out, absolutely. For your next one then, I am going to point us back towards Venom, because you mentioned particularly a track called Pedal to the Metal from Venom, which is Goransson's score for the 2018 film with Tom Hardy as Venom, Eddie Brock, the investigative reporter. So it's a Spider-Man spin-off without Spider-Man, basically, Venom. And a film which, you said earlier that Venom's not very good. I agree, but at the same time, I remember thinking for the first 40 minutes, this is dull as shit. I was thinking, I'm not this is rubbish. And then he becomes Venom, and my God, the film goes fucking bananas. And Hardy is crazy. Absolutely. There's a particular sequence where he's in a restaurant and he's like in a fish tank or whatever. He pulls out a fish and he goes, "This is dead. It's dead," like that. It's just he's gone mad. And it's one of those brilliant sort of eccentric Tom Hardy performances. At that point, I actually found the film quite entertaining, even though it's a load of old rubbish. But the score, I mean, if I'm honest though, the score didn't really make an impact with me. So is this one particularly you think is one of those classic? It's a better score than the movie kind of. Jobs. Yeah,
although that's not particularly hard because I think the film is awful. It's just, I mean, that's not to denigrate Goransson's score, because I actually think the score is listened to on its own terms, like Tenet, yields a lot of rewards. Actually, certainly, I don't really remember anything about the music I'd heard in the movie as making an impact. So I thought the movie was so dull, I wasn't really paying any attention to the music anyway. I mean, it's also that scene when it's a lobster tank, isn't it? When he jumps in.
Yeah, that's it.
That scene apparently was improvised by Tom Hardy. That he improvised.
Of course it was.
He improvised that. So just think, if Tom Hardy hadn't improvised that, would we remember anything about the film at all? Probably not. So it's entirely down to Tom Hardy and his array of like muffled, sort of accent-defying voices that makes this moment. I mean, I just think it's a superhero movie made by people who assume we've not seen any superhero movies before, because I was watching it thinking this would have felt creaky in 2003. This would have felt really old hat in 2003. And just, it's so generic. It's so kind of like, okay, there's a guy, he's a bit of a loser, he loses his job, he loses his girlfriend, oh look, he gets infected by a symbiote, oh look, there's Riz Ahmed, completely wasted as the evil entrepreneur who's trying to do a scientific experiment, like blah blah blah. We've seen all this before. It's just so limp, and it just doesn't capitalise on the premise. And yeah, that absence of Spider-Man is kind of it. That is so awkward. There is like a massive vacuum. Ironically enough, given that Venom comes from a vacuum itself, there is a vacuum at the centre of the movie that they are desperately trying to skirt around for copyright reasons. And I just think, it's just so corporate. And but the score, when I heard it on its own, I thought the score was interesting. I mean, it's an incredibly challenging score and an incredibly dark one. It's not easy to listen to at all, which is kind of weird, given that the film is so cheesy. And there are scenes of Tom Hardy with, elasticated limbs knocking people out of windows and, with bad special effects and things like that. And I think that the fact that the score is so experimental and so creative kind of took me by surprise, because again, it didn't register with me in the film at all. What you've got what I took away from it was that you've got that central motif for Venom, which is often carried on the brass, but it's got loads of like crushing electronic distortion on it. That grows in stature alongside another theme for Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock character, the journalist, who then fuses with Venom, and then they become the Venom human symbiote. And out of that comes this theme towards the end of the album, which has got a real gothic stature to it with a very deep choir. It did remind me a lot of what Christopher Young did with Venom for Spider-Man 3, which is the film that no one liked. But Christopher Young's score for that was great. He's a terrific composer, and it did remind me a lot of that. There are a lot of very, very uncomfortable sequences in which it's very dysrhythmic and polymorphous and sort of very atonal orchestra and buzzing electronics. The idea is that it's meant to represent the malleability of the Venom symbiote. That's what I assume it meant. The idea is that it's being warped and turned inside out, and it's meant to sound very, very unpleasant. The pedal to the metal track is one of the more listenable tracks because it's got a real propulsive rhythm to it. Again, we've mentioned rhythm all the way through this episode. Goransson is really good at that. He's got a really good rhythmic intuition, and it's the I believe it, well, based on the track title, it must be the motorbike chase sequence. So yeah, it's a better score than you'd think from the movie. I'd say anyone who is remotely curious about going to listen to it, be careful. It's far less accessible than a lot of Goransson's other scores, but there is more intelligence in it than than the film would perhaps indicate.
Yeah, which again, it doesn't give him much credit, really.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But no, I know what you mean, and maybe that's one of the reasons it didn't stand out to me, actually. And it's maybe one of the Goransson scores I tend to forget, actually, the Venom score. But it is one I'll go back and check out. I mean, I dare say I might end up rewatching Venom before the new sequel. Although maybe not, to be honest. I say that, yeah. But why would I put myself through it? It wasn't terrible. I didn't hate it, but it was ridiculous. So maybe not really. I don't know if he's scoring what is it called? Let There Be
Carnage. Yeah, it's I was thinking about that actually because Andy Serkis is directing that, and Ruben Fleischer obviously did the first film, and I wonder whether maybe because the film Venom 2 was meant to have come out this year, and I wondered if they were maybe umming and ahhing about getting Ludwig Goransson on it because presumably he was working at Tenet at the time, and maybe now that Venom 2 has been pushed back to 2021, maybe they're now holding out for him. They just haven't announced it yet. Not sure.
IMDb doesn't list anyone, so quite possibly, yeah. No one else has been given the gig, so it's quite possible he'll come back and do that. But we'll see. We'll see about that one. Before we go then, I just want to take us back to Black Panther, which obviously is as great as Tenet is in many ways. Black Panther is still his zenith, I think, right now, really, in many respects, in terms of, his popularity anyway and what he's done. I mean, you could point to almost any, I think, track on Black Panther. I mean, I particularly love the sort of United Nations end credits sort of suite at the end, which I think is great. But I wanted to just talk about Busan Car Chase. And actually, the track just preceding it, because it's set to what might be one of my favourite sequences in the whole movie. It's the sequence, and it's funny we're talking about Tenet and spy movies, because that whole sequence in, I think, South Korea, where it's set, where T'Challa goes to the casino, is proper full-on James Bond, that whole sequence. And I think the Busan Car Chase is a great example of what Goransson can do in terms of action music. I think it's a really well put together chase sequence in terms of the frenetic action of it and all the instrumentation he uses, and the build up, the casino. I can't remember the one before, the track before that, but it's basically the casino fight before he chases Ulysses Claw in the car. But I just think it's a great example of the range that Black Panther has. You can go from that sort of, like you said, that trip hop on kind of Killmonger stuff to the very sort of African beat style of things like the waterfall sort of fight, and then the very melodic tracks towards the end. I think it's just great. I think it's different kind of action tempo to what you get in Tenet, but I think it just, again, adds to the fact that Black Panther is a fantastic piece of work.
Yeah, it is, and I think it foregrounds the T'Challa hero theme brilliantly. There's the scene when the car flips over, and then you've got the overhead shot of him leaping and then landing back on the roof, which is a really well spotted and scored sequence, as indeed is the whole of the sequence. Yeah, it's a really fabulous. I think that was one of the first clips that they released online prior to the movie coming out, and I remember being very curious to hear what the music sounded like in context, should it actually have any music, and it did. And I remember hearing a sample of the score, and when that brassy interlude comes in as he leaps into the, I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like that's a theme. We've got a theme there by the sounds of it. Yeah. And you know, the MCU. Although I said that the MCU has had several fine scores, thematic consistency and thematic robustness has been mixed, to say the least. It has been improved with the likes of Alan Silvestri on the Avengers scores, and also Michael Giacchino on the Spider-Man scores as well. But it took us a long time to get to that point, and I think Goransson continued that tradition brilliantly. It's a fine score, and I suppose we should also say that it's very poignantly it obviously the score in retrospect now channels the spirit of Chadwick Boseman as well, who has been was an incredibly gracious individual who clearly understood the responsibility that he was carrying by portraying Black Panther, and I think the music captures his spirit just magnificently well. Yeah,
I would again refer people to the latest episode of Motion Pictures, because we do a tribute to Chadwick Boseman and talk about his career and things like that. And I think it's a fitting epitaph in many ways. You know, that whole film, and you know, musically as well, to the man, and you know, the career he didn't have, sadly, but the great mark he made with T'Challa and that, you know, fantastic movie. So yeah, it's a great piece of music that does him justice. But yeah, we'll call it a day there. Anyway, we've covered Tenet. We'd encourage anyone to let us know what you think. Again, hit us up on social media and on our various places, and let us know what you think of the music to Tenet particularly as well, and if you think Goransson's score has struck a chord. But we'll be back in a few weeks, won't we, Sean? I think you're off on holiday, aren't you, for a couple of weeks, which will be nice. So
yeah, I'm staycationing in Devon with my parents, which would be nice. It's the first bit of holiday I've had since Christmas last year. Obviously, owing to all the disruption this year, trying to go on holiday has actually been quite difficult. So
no, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to just shutting my brain off for a couple of weeks. That'll be nice.
Well, yeah, just watch Venom on repeat. That'll make it easy.
Yeah, that'll make me brain dead. That
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, have a great time, and we'll be back in a few weeks. We have been doing fortnightly sort of episodes, and we hope eventually to get back to a weekly kind of thing. But for now, we'll be back in maybe about 3 weeks or so, and then we'll be back for a new episode. But thanks for listening and joining us for another episode. And remember, we're still part of the We Made This podcast network, and the music of Ludwig Goransson is not the only thing we're talking about. So we'll give you a little taste of what you might have missed on the network in a minute, but we'll play you out with the last little bit of Tenet as well, for you to enjoy. And thanks again for listening. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you next time discussing the music of film Between the Notes. elsewhere on We Made This. We buy records.
The very idea of not indicating this is a reissue from this year, we would always write on the label the year if it's a reissue. If it's come in to us second hand, you'd have to be a real shitbag, wouldn't you, to like put in a Smith's record and not point out, actually, this is the reissue from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, you would have to be. But we've seen all sorts of dodgy practices, so I wouldn't put it past someone to try it or to deliberately do that.
People are awful.
They are.
Motion pictures.
For that character, the character he plays, Norman, is someone who's held in such high regard by his friends, like decades after the fact, isn't he? By his colleagues from the army, you know, and they go back to find this gold and to pay their respects to him and stuff. You needed somebody who could kind of make that work, you know, somebody who had the charisma to really pull that off with just a few scenes, and I think he had that, you know. And I think, in a sad way though, like I watched that film for the second time Saturday night, and
that was played really differently now. My God, yeah.
Retrospectively, it's made even more poignant because, like his character, he's gonna forever be in our minds as a man about that age. You know, he's not going to be able to grow old like his friends in the film did.
Amazing. You know? Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast.
If you're trying to roll under something on 2d6, your average on 2d6 is 7. So if you've got a skill at, say, I don't know, 2 and a main stat at 2, you're going to be trying to roll a 4 or under on 2d6. That's a really quite tricky roll. And 2 and 2 is not necessarily a bad stat in this game either. Stats are quite low.
Yeah, they did seem to be that, yeah.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Between the Notes is produced and edited by Tony Black, who hosts alongside Sean Wilson. You can find Tony on Twitter at AJBlackWriter and Sean on Twitter at Seano22. You can find Between the Notes on Twitter at BTW_notes, on iTunes, your podcast app of choice, on Spotify, Stitcher, and on Spreaker, where the show is part of the We Made This podcast network. For more podcasts all about TV, film, books, music, and popular culture in general, you can find We Made This on Facebook and on Twitter at We Made This Pod. Thanks for listening.